All right, guys, welcome back to Drive It Out. My name is Adam, and we have a stellar two-car comparison for you today. We're about 2 decades removed from when these cars came out. You know, in 20 years, a lot has changed in the automotive world, and a lot has changed for these brands. These cars used to battle, right? Back in the day, think late 90s, right? When both of these cars came out. We have lots of comparisons of these cars from back then, but I wanted to do a little something from present day. You've got the 996 911 here, came after the 993. There's a big change. That 993 was still air-cooled. This is water-cooled. That was a big deal. We've got the C5 Corvette here, right? Think about the C4. That generation Corvette, the C4, lasted like what seemed forever, and there was major changes. You've got a transaxle now. They pushed that transmission back toward the rear of the car, and now you've got this beautiful, almost perfect 50-50 weight distribution in this car. That's a big deal. When big design changes are made, I think we get to a point when you go on in years a little ways and the scope of those things gets much smaller and they don't matter as much anymore. And as a car ages, you can look back at it and really see it for what it was, and we can appreciate what it is today, even 20 years later, because you've got really affordable used performance here. And I think both of these cars are still extremely impressive. So I want to talk about both of these cars in detail. How have they stood up over time? How does the performance of these cars compare to new cars today? How well have the designs held up? Were they ahead of their time a little, or were they a little bit too comfortable? So let's think about that as we look at both of these cars in detail. We're here at the front of the 911. Let's go ahead and get this out of the way, right? Let's talk about the headlights. This generation went away from those round, bug-eyed headlights that Porsche 911 had always had, and it went to these kind of melted headlights that go along with the contour of the nose of the car. And at first, people really didn't know how it was gonna make them feel. They call them, you know, the Friday headlight. They kind of just, rather than having the round pieces, you've got this edge here where it comes all the way down and you get your parking lights and your signals in there. I don't really mind it. I think that maybe why some people didn't like it at the beginning is because remember what else came out in the late 90s from Porsche? It was the Boxster. And the Boxster was about giving a more affordable entry-level model into the Porsche brand. And I think 911 owners thought that it just looked a little too much like a Boxster. Maybe it had a little too much in common. I'm not sure, but the front ends of both the Boxster and the first 996 911s are pretty much identical, so they do look very similar. But if you can get past those headlights, think about the rest of this car. This car got more aerodynamic, right? The rake of the windshield went down even further than it was on the 993. This car became more aerodynamic and more smooth shape, and I've got to say that I really like it. I'm kind of a sucker for base model cars without a lot of, you know, wings and scoops and everything on them. I like smooth shapes, so I really like this vehicle. As you look at the front end here, the way the lines go on this car is really sharp. And this silver, you know, it doesn't stand out as a bright color, but even in bright colors, this car looks really good because it lets the curves do all the talking, right? It's definitely a little more subtle of a design than the C5 Corvette that we're comparing it to. All right, guys, let's look at the side profile of this 996 911. Look, there's just not much to talk about here, right? It's just clean, just smooth, clean surfaces. But I think it's beautiful. I think it's actually a really handsome design. It's not in your face quite as much as the Corvette is, but it's just a completely different look. The style when you roll up in this car, it doesn't really crash the party, you know, like the style of the Corvette. It's much more subtle, but if you sit and you really look at it, it's a very interesting car to look at it, and it gets you thinking, and it makes you wonder, what's here? What's there? I want to push the car farther. It's much like the way the car drives, actually, but I really dig the side profile of this car because I just think it's clean and simple in the most beautiful way. Now, I've got the spoiler up here on the back, but with that down, it looks even smoother. I tend to like the spoiler up in the back to give it just a little more attitude. I really like the side profile of the 996 911. I think it's gorgeous. Here at the back end of the 911, Again, there's not a whole lot to talk about. The clean lines continue back here. Like a 911, you've got a very wide back end, right? You've got a lot of back of the car hanging over here past the rear wheels, and it's because there's that engine back there. Obviously, you've got that flat 6 motor back there. Now, you got the spoiler up, you're looking good. You got your Cyclops light up here. It looks really good with the top down. You do have these bumper guards right here. You know, these cars got to meet crash test standards, and that is part of that. This is a really clean car, front all the way to the back. It's really a non-offensive design. It's really nice to look at. So if you are looking for used performance nowadays and you want to have something that's clean, you can take anywhere you want and it's just going to look nice. It can be an event or it can be a fun car just to go driving through the hills and maybe attack some twisty roads. This car is the ticket. You know, you've got the engine back here. There's about 60% of the weight of this car is here in the back. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that does to driving dynamics. It makes it a lot different than that Corvette over there. So it's going to be a matter of what flavor do you want. I have to say, design-wise, I really like this 996 911. We have to talk about the interior of these vehicles. If you're going to own one of these cars, you've got to live with the inside. Maybe those around you don't see the inside, but you do. And that is one thing that really ages these vehicles, both of them, is the interior. So when you're sitting in here right away, you just have to know you're getting tech and you're getting style on the interior from the late 90s. And if you can live with that, I really think you should look past it because it's such a wonderful vehicle to drive anyway. And it doesn't bother me so much because when I'm enjoying this car is when I'm driving this car. Porsche, no matter what, you're gonna get good looking gauge. You've got the tachometer right there in the middle showing you your RPMs. You do have a digital readout for your speed right below that. They've got those sharp orange needles on there and they're really good looking, but the rest of the interior just has a lot to be desired. The deck here where you've got the climate control and you've got the stereo system, it just ages the car so bad, but everybody knows this about both generations of vehicles. You know, they were working with what they had at the time. Porsche had just gone through some really financial struggles and they were really trying to rebound. That really plays into the story of the Boxster that was coming out at the same time as this car. This one here is the Triptronic transmission. It's automatic. I do love this car in a manual, but this Triptronic is here. So you've got buttons for that on the steering wheel. You've got your shifter down here in the middle. You do have a multi-CD operation here with the stereo system. One thing that you notice right away is you've got airbags all over the place. So you've got front airbags and you've got side airbags here in the door. And the way that they were really working around designing all of these things, the obvious feature that this car has over the C5 Corvette, or any Corvette for that matter, and that is you've got back seats, if you can call them that. They're almost novelty back seats. You can't fit very much back there or very much person back there. So they would call this a 2+2 because you've got 2 seats in the front and you do have 2 in the back. It's not a 4-door car and you do not have room like that by any means. So I always remember 2+2 equals 4 uncomfortable people, because if you actually put 2 people in those back seats, they're uncomfortable. You have to put the front seats far forward enough to fit them back there. So now the people in the front are also uncomfortable. You get this car and you treat it like a 2-seat Roadster and you're gonna have lots and lots of fun. But in the rare situation, you've got to put somebody back there, or maybe you're gonna take the kids to school. Hey, it actually could work great for that. But looking at this interior, I think you really just gotta focus on the gauges and focus on driving this car. All right, guys, let's look in detail at this C5 Corvette. And just like we got it out of the way with the Porsche, let's get it out of the way with the Corvette. Let's initially talk about these headlights. Now, the C5 Corvette went through 2004, and 2004 was the very last model year that we saw pop-up headlights on vehicles sold in the United States. The only one other than the C5 Corvette in 2004 that still had pop-up headlights being produced for the United States was the Lotus Esprit. Now, the Lotus was a much lower volume car than the Corvette, but I miss pop-up headlights. I like them so much. By this time, they had really sorted out things with these pop-up headlights where it wasn't like the 80s where if you had a car with pop-up headlights, they, you know, all the time they had one up and one down. When they left this generation and went on to the C6, they got rid of the pop-up headlights, and that did a lot of things for them. It helped with crash test standards, you know, a way they design things, but it also helps with aerodynamics. at night when you are using those lights. Compared to the C4, this car got a little more curvy, right? The C5. I remember when the C5 came out, the hood lines just really got me, right? You've got the curves that come up. Those fenders right there over the wheels is awesome. And now, instead of having a full like clamshell effect with the hood like the C4 where the whole hood and the fenders and everything came up all at once, they've got hood lines cut here above the fenders on the C5. You've got those Corvette flags up here, you've got air inlets down here, and there's actually fog lights hiding down in there. I remember the first time I saw a C5 Corvette, I saw a red one and it stuck out like crazy, and I made my mom do a U-turn and we went back to look at it, and just I sat there and looked at it, and I had never seen anything like it. Really think about coming from the C4 to the C5. It was just awesome to look at. Front end of the Corvette, that hood line is really low. You've got an engine up here, but it's an LS motor. This is the LS1. No overhead cams here. You're able to keep that really low hood line for great aerodynamics, and the visibility out the front windshield looking over the front of this car is unlike any other. The side profile of this Corvette is just luscious. Look at those curves over those wheels. This is those Coke bottle curves that you kind of know Corvette for. This car has a presence that is so unique to its name. Now, this car is really low. You get in this car and you sit down, you instantly feel like you're on the floor. You're looking out over that hood, you see those muscular fenders, and you just gotta love it. Some people, they have preference where they wanna feel like they're up a little higher and looking down, kind of see the front of the car a little more, or look directly down that nose. You can dart around with the nose of that car. Here with the Corvette, you feel like you've got a lot in front of you because you do, and it actually, I really like the way that it feels looking out over those fenders, and those fenders kind of serve as visual cues when you're turning the car in a performance situation. This guard here for the door, that piece of trim was optional, so you'll see the C5 Corvettes and about half of them don't have that piece. I actually like it with that piece. I think it adds a little bit to the side profile of the car. Corvette here, you've got some bright chrome wheels. It just looks like a classic Corvette. And again, this is a base model. They had the Z06 and all of that, but I really like the clean lines of the base model. And this car looks really good in black. Let's go around here to the back end. I know you know what you're gonna see back here because it's a Corvette, but let's talk about it a little bit in detail. Here at the back end of the Corvette, and you know what you're gonna get back here. You got double taillights on both sides. Now, they're still round. This is a C5 Corvette. They didn't get funny shaped for 2 more generations, so you see this car miles in front of you, you know what it is. It's a Corvette. I actually like the continuity that's going on here with the exhaust outlets. This car is low and wide, and the back end of this car is shaped so much differently than it was on the C4. And I think what they were doing here aerodynamically is really cool. I remember when the C5 came out, it was so much different than seeing a C4 from the rear end. It was quite a bold change, but actually if you look from the side at the rear end of the Corvette, you really see it almost has kind of a ducktail effect at the top right there above the Cyclops light, and that's really cool. You've got that Corvette script that you can count on right there between the taillights, and this car is not ashamed to be saying what it is. It's very bold. It's a Corvette name. You gotta love the name. The name is unique. I like cars with names rather than just numbers. You got nice wide tires back there. And I tell you what, you don't have the weight back here that you have in that Porsche 911, so they're gonna drive a lot different. This can be a little more tail happy a little sooner, but that can kind of add to the fun, and we'll continue to talk about that as we get in this car and go for a drive. All right, guys, let's talk about the interior of this Corvette. Now, like I said, both of these vehicles are not gonna wow you with the interior. They're really dated, and anytime you're gonna look at anything that directly has to do with tech right in your face, that stuff seems to age the fastest because of how quickly tech moves. Things like your climate control and your stereo, you know, those things are really in your face and you're gonna see that. But I will say this, while the interiors of both of these vehicles, the materials are just not great, I will say that they look better in the C5 Corvette. Something about the way that they fit everything together, the way that it flows together, it looks a lot nicer. So as long as you don't touch it physically with your hand, it actually looks pretty nice. Now, I think it helps this car being black on black in color because the interior on these C5 Corvettes in the lighter colors doesn't tend to age as well. And that's kind of a disadvantage for the particular 911 that we have in this comparison as well because it's got a lighter color interior. And it really highlights that interior in that 911. It's pieced together in a way that just seems a little bit more like an afterthought. It doesn't flow super well, and it just doesn't look very sharp. So at least here in the Corvette, while you don't have great materials, it fits together and it flows really well. So if you're okay with sitting in an interior, a black interior where it just kind of all flows together and it's like you're sitting in just a dark, cavernous blob, it's not too bad. But again, I think the reason that you buy them today, it's not as your everyday vehicle, but it's kind of as your secondary fun car, or a car for events or special occasions, or just to drive on the weekends to relax and clear your head. So I want you to think about, when you're driving these cars, focus on what you're doing with your hands and your feet and looking at those gauges, because that is where these cars really still shine. Now, I have to say, while I love the gauges on that 911, I do like the gauges on the C5 Corvette as well. They're clean, they're easy to read. You don't have a tech in the center. You know, your tachometer is on the left and your speed's on the right. But what this car has that is really awesome is it has a heads-up display. Now, that became available in GM vehicles a long time ago. They experimented with that, but it really became a staple in the C5 Corvette, and actually you could get it starting in 1999 on the C5 Corvette. And the heads-up display is really sharp. It's really good to look at. You put your speed and your RPMs out there in front of you. It helps keep your eyes up. And man, I really like that. So it's kind of serving the purpose and the same thinking as why you put a tachometer in the very center of a cluster like you do in the Porsche, because it needs to be very quickly looked at or seen in your peripheral, and the heads-up display really does that for you. So the heads-up display kind of takes this interior and it kind of gives it that just extra edge that I really like. Both of these cars, you've got automatic everything, and that is really nice. This Corvette here, you know, you've got dual climate control, you've got a nice digital display for that. But again, you don't buy these cars for the interior. You just don't. And you're always going to hear people complain about it. But I would say don't complain. Get the car, enjoy it for the driving experience that it has to offer. And I will also say that these Corvette seats are pretty comfortable, but put them in a performance situation, you may be desiring a little bit more support at your sides. I think it's fine, and you're really going to get down in this car. You're going to look out over that hood and you're going to enjoy it. So let's get in both these cars and take them on the road and talk about the driving dynamics a little bit. All right, guys, we're in the 996 911, and like I said, this is a completely different driving experience. You know, driving around town, I've got all that weight in the back end of this car, and it kind of just feels like you're lugging it around. To get this car to feel fun, you gotta push it. You know, it's fun to be in, don't get me wrong, even at low speeds, but from a driving dynamic standpoint, you want to push this car, and that's by design, and that's fine, because pushing this car is a blast, and you're really going to get a lot out of it from a performance standpoint. This car is a performer. Don't sleep on this car by any means, but if you're not pushing it, then you're not feeling much of those dynamics. Where in the Corvette, maybe it almost gives you a false sense of dynamics because the way you can just play with it so easily at low speeds. And this car, you really got to rev up more. Now you do both. You've got naturally aspirated engines in both of these. There's no turbos, but again, this is a straight comparison of two base model cars. But the way this flat six is, when you push it, the way that the back kind of crouches down to the car, it's really awesome. Actually, you just feel like you're really hugging the road, and you're going to be really far out in the performance of this car before you feel that front end starting to get light, you know, when you're turning the wheel. So twisty roads, man, this 911 just really shines. But you've really got to go out and get it. So if you live near some mountains or some hills or some really twisty roads, this 911 may be your first choice. But you know, if you are in the Corvette, it's still great on twisty roads, but man, there's just kind of fun to be had at every stoplight and every corner. So I've got to say it again, in the 911, you know, showing up in this car is just a much different attitude and atmosphere than in that Corvette. You know, if you show up, if you're the guy who, when you show up at a party or at a get-together and you're like, oh, here comes trouble, you know, you're probably the guy in the Corvette. And if you show up in the 911, you know, maybe people think, you know, that guy's maybe more of a driver, but I don't know. I think that might be a misconception, because both of these cars are absolutely for drivers and for the driving experience. Now, we aren't getting either of these cars out on the track today, but both of these cars will do just fine on the track. And that is definitely, again, it becomes a preference thing. You know, in life, there are truths, there are convictions, and there are preferences. And these two cars, the driving dynamics is definitely a preference thing, because they're both awesome in their own way, and they're both a lot of fun. And to be honest, if you could choose, I would almost say you want to have both in your garage, and you know, you have them both for different purposes. Now you're really splitting hairs, but it's kind of like, you know, you have different pairs of shoes and different outfits for doing different things, because different outfits accomplish different things. You know, if I'm in the 911, I want to go out and I want to hit some twisty roads, you know, and just be really, really athletic with the car. You know, I'm gonna do that. But when I want to have the Corvette and I really just want to mess around, you know, out on the streets or driving around town, it's really, really good at that. So what are you gonna do with these cars? If you're shopping both these cars, what's your plan? What are you mostly gonna do with the car? Are you gonna go get in a little bit of tracking or some autocrossing, or are you gonna just take these on road trips to the mountains on the weekends? You know, maybe the 911 is your play. But you know, if you're looking for something to just at any moment in time, you're gonna get in it and it's just gonna be fun, and it's just gonna have lots of attitude, and it's kind of in your face, I think the Corvette is for you. I really do. But both of these cars are a joy to drive in a completely different way. You know, the Corvette has 50 more horsepower than this 911, but they put power to the ground completely differently. So when you drive the Corvette, you instantly just want to have fun with the rear end of the vehicle. You know, like I said, it's a lot easier to have that fun in this car at low speeds. You know, in the 911, I find myself wanting to push the car faster and faster all the time, and that's kind of where it shines. But this Corvette, while it is fun to push as well, you can also have a whole lot of fun with it just at low speeds. It provides that little extra fun kind of around town that I don't quite get in the 911. So now this is the coupe with the removable roof panel here, the Targa top. You can get the traditional convertible in the Corvette. Both body styles look really nice. I actually prefer the hardtop, especially if you can get the glass roof panel on there, because then you can kind of have the nice quiet cabin of the coupe with the top up that you can't get with a soft top convertible. And if you're driving in the colder months, cold weather months in the wintertime, that glass roof panel allows some of that heat to stay in your car when the car is parked. And I actually like that quite a bit. Now the 996 911 later on actually offered a sliding glass roof target top version. If you can find one of those are pretty unique and those are really cool. But in this Corvette, you know, you've got that 50-50 weight distribution, right? So the car feels very balanced. You know, you go back and forth between the two vehicles, and it's so obvious how differently they drive. The dynamics are just totally different. You've got all that weight in the rear end of the 911, and it's actually a little more confidence-inspiring around turns. And you find yourself, you know, you push the car differently than you do with this Corvette. But again, this Corvette, being tail happy, provides an element of fun that the 911 doesn't have. Yeah, definitely, I think if you get either one of these cars, that the manual transmission is the way to go. Both cars have a good manual transmission, and they're a lot of fun to drive, they're a lot of fun to work with. But if you want to really interact with the power that these cars have to deliver, I just think there's no better option than manual. The automatic offered in the C5 Corvette just was nothing to write home about. That old automatic, no paddle shifters or anything on the steering wheel. You know, the Porsche would win the automatic battle. It's got that Triptronic. At least you got, you know, some steering wheel controls to play with, and that transmission is quite a bit sharper as an automatic. But I really think you want manual on either one of these cars. So again, I think you're buying the car to have fun with on the weekends, you know, or drive to work on nice days or what have you. And being able to interact with the car with the third pedal is definitely the way to go. So now, Porsche still offers a manual transmission even today, and the newer C8 Corvette, they've lost that. They can't put a manual transmission in that car in that layout. If you look at the layout of that interior, I don't know where they would put a shifter, a manual shifter. So it's just automatic only. It's that dual clutch transmission, which is a great transmission, but you know, a purchase like this of an older performance car like these, I think one of the added benefits of getting one of these is your ability to play with it with the manual transmission. So this Corvette, definitely fun to drive. You know, like I said, you show up in this car, you kind of crash the party a little bit. It's a little more boisterous and a little more loud than that 911. And you can get out and you can have some fun and do some, you can misbehave a little bit with it. It's just a lot of fun. It's really easy to do with all this power. So definitely a fun car to drive. And for the money, I don't know where else you're gonna get a funner car to drive with this much power. So let's talk a little bit about what we know about these vehicles now, having had them for 20 years, that we maybe didn't know when they first came out. First, style-wise, we've already talked about the clean lines of the Porsche, and we've already talked about the nice curves on the Corvette, with a little bit more lines on the exterior design. When they originally came out, I think the Corvette actually was a big leap forward from the previous generation Corvette. As far as the design being a little ahead of its time, I don't know if I would go that far. It's very curvy and bubbly, very 90s. As far as the Porsche, they didn't take as big of a leap forward in the way the car looks, if you take away the headlights, of course, but they have always had a design that somewhat more evolves than it does change anyway. So I honestly think the shape of the 996 911 actually has stood the test of time a little better, as it kind of holds true to the brand itself. The Corvette, I still think, looks good. Performance-wise, these vehicles, these are not slow cars. These are fast cars. If you care about the specs, if you care about what the car does on paper, these are still cars that had high 4 seconds, 0 to 60 times, you know, and decent quarter-mile times. They're not gonna keep up on paper with cars of today, but as far as enjoyment and engagement while driving them, still feeling good power, it's all good. You're right here. Remember, we've got SUVs and trucks today that will do crazy straight line sprints. But I tell you what, once you are down in a sports car and you're feeling the dynamics And when you're tossing that weight around, it's so much less weight than bigger vehicles of today. You know, these both still are about 3,200 pounds right there, give or take. And vehicles have gotten so heavy these days. You're low to the ground, and the way that you shift the weight around in these vehicles, go around turns, and the way that they handle is just gonna be unmatched, even compared to like a modern big car that's maybe really fast, but it's just kind of a giant. Things that we know mechanically, if you're big fans of these cars, you may think, oh, you know, I know the problems with this car, or I know the potential problems with this car. Issues can seem really big at first, and nowadays we have the internet and we have all kinds of forums on any type of car you're looking for, and sometimes problems can be amplified to be worse than they really are. So of course, when you think about the 996 911, maybe you go, uh-oh, IMS bearing, and it's a splinter in your brain, and you can't stop thinking about it. That truly affected less cars than you probably think that it did. And if you're going to buy a used 996 911, I think the one you don't want is the one that's barely been driven. If you find a 20-year-old 911 and it's only had a couple thousand miles on the clock per year or less, and it's 20 years old, that may not be the one that you want if you are gonna worry and fret about IMS bearing problems. You know, if you're gonna buy a really low mileage 996, I'm gonna tell you, go ahead and buy it and plan on replacing the IMS bearing. But if you find one that's got actually higher miles, you know, what's great about these two cars that I didn't mention before is they're so close in year. They're perfect for comparing in so many ways, but something I didn't mention is they both actually have 63,000 miles on them. So 20 years old, 63,000 miles, that's actually a good amount of miles per year for each vehicle. So I would not be hesitant about buying either one of these cars with that mileage. And if you're thinking in relation to the IMS bearing, the ones that have been driven more often are actually the ones that seem to have less of a problem with that lubrication down there. Now, when you think about the Corvette, maybe you go, oh, I don't know, it's the harmonic balancer. Maybe you're worried about that on the early LS motors. That is something that is easily identifiable. You can pick it out before it really, really goes wrong. You can get it fixed, you can get it replaced. That is something that is kind of an expensive fix, as is the IMS bearing on the 996. Again, I think it affects less cars than you think of. So if you aren't familiar with either one of these cars and you're seriously considering them, look at things that they're known for. You know, this is early 2000s, late 90s. There's kind of quirky electronics on both of these vehicles, you know, so just kind of know that going in. But overall, I actually think that you will be surprised at the reliability of both of these vehicles. Again, they're both naturally aspirated. They're not under tons and tons of stress with these majorly high compression ratios and turbos or superchargers or anything like that. I really think that you would be surprised with how you can get one of these and just drive it and not worry about it. If I had to tip my hat to one side or the other for reliability, I'm most definitely going with the Corvette. They're cheaper to work on, they're less expensive when things go wrong generally, and things tend to go wrong less. Porsche, you may have a few more surprises, but again, not a ton of surprises. I really think you can just drive it and not worry, but when it is time for maintenance, it is gonna cost you a bit more. So let's sum things up on these two competitors. Now, these cars are not new. I don't think they're quite old enough to be classics, but there's like that 20 to 30 year rule, right? When a car is desirable by a certain generation, you know, then you go about 30 years removed from when the car came out, and that generation kind of has money that they want to have fun with or play with and get something that was kind of from their desires of their childhood or their teenage years or their young 20s. And those cars we tend to see go up in value. So look at how the muscle cars from the late 60s and early 70s started to go up in value in the 90s. And now think about the way that the position that these two cars are in now. They're about 20 years old. They haven't hit that level where you would think the prices for really nice ones would really start to skyrocket. They are affordable right now. So if you're gonna get into one and keep it for a long time, keep it long term, I really don't think you can go wrong with either one of these. But that said, if you're looking to get in one to just have for a short time, you don't care a whole lot about mileage, get a high mileage version of either one of these. And I think you can have fun for a year or two or three, and then maybe move on to something else. And that is something that a lot of guys do with these cars. It's not unusual to find one of these vehicles for sale and you see that it has 3, 4 owners, because people will get these, they will enjoy them for a time, and then they will move on to something newer, or maybe something with more power, kind of depending on what they're looking for, or just something with newer tech that feels a little nicer. And I don't think you buy these cars to be your only vehicle. I think you tend to fill the second or third spot in the garage or the driveway with one of these vehicles. If you buy them for that, then every time you're getting in it to go drive it, it's a treat. It's a total treat, and you're gonna enjoy it. If you're gonna drive one of these daily, you can't be precious with it. The car's 20 years old, and driving a car every day, it's gonna get beat up a little bit. You can't be overly precious with it. If you tend to go and lean toward the cleaner styling of the Porsche, you know, you clean one of these up really well and you park it somewhere and get out of it, people will think it's much newer than it is because it just holds that shape. The Corvette, people will still think that it looks really nice and it's got a lot of attitude, but they know exactly how old that it is. And once you get into the C6, the C7 Corvette, that changes a little bit, but the C5 kind of has aged to that point where people know the era that it is from. It's really hard to choose a winner here, but because I think it comes down to you and what you're looking for. I really like both of these vehicles. There's great performance. You get over 300 horsepower in both these cars. You get about 300 horsepower and about 350 horsepower, but like I talked about, the way that these cars put the power down is completely different. I love the actual convertible experience that this particular 911 has here. Really wish it had a manual transmission. If I were gonna put one in my garage, it's gotta have the manual transmission. That's my personal preference. It's a great car either way, but there's no PDK yet. Remember, Porsche's got PDK now, and that transmission is really, really slick. Now, as far as the Corvette, I think it's no questions asked, you gotta have a stick. The sticks are holding up better in value. The manual transmissions are, because those automatics just, they're such slush boxes. On the C5 Corvette, and the automatic did get better with the C6. You've now got paddles. When you go to the C6 and the C7, they really sharpen that up. And then obviously the mid-engine Corvette has a dual clutch transmission, which is just butter. But C5 Corvette, it's a great looking car. It's easy to take care of. It's so much fun. It really looks good. Get it in a manual transmission and you're just gonna have a lot of fun. 350 horsepower is plenty of power. So I've really enjoyed comparing both of these vehicles today. I'm really impressed with both for completely different reasons. And I hope that you can use this video maybe to help you if you're shopping for one of these cars. I want to thank you so much again for watching Drive It Out. Don't forget to subscribe.